Welcome to the Secrets of Book Publishing panel. A lot of my students know that my favorite thing to do is to get the most brilliant literary agents and book editors I know together and pick their brains and ask them all kinds of questions. And it's such a weird, difficult market that this seemed like a perfect time to do it. So I'm going to, I'll just mention the panelists, and we'll, instead of reading bios, we'll get them to tell us about themselves and what they're doing. So we have here tonight literary agents Matthew Carnicelli, Jennifer Chen Tran, Ryan Harbage, and Prannoy Sarkar, and book editors Lashanda Anakawa, who is from Random House, Joy Peskin from FSG Kids Book, and Nicholas Shiani from Simon and Schuster. So let's start with Matthew. So if you go to Manuscript Wishlist, which I think is a great resource for any authors that are looking for agents, it says that you do nonfiction, fiction, and then you told me anything but romantasy.
Yeah, that's about right. I got into book publishing about, God, over 3 decades ago. I was on track to become an English professor, and I decided that type of world was completely irrelevant, and I wanted to publish meaningful books and books of change. So I quickly got a position as an editorial assistant at Dutton and Plume way back when in the early 90s. And right away, I was doing a lot of history. I was doing a lot of literary fiction. I was doing current events. I was doing environmental books. And I was off to a pretty good start. And then I continued and I went on to another company called McGraw-Hill. And I wasn't a huge fan of that company, so I quit and I started my own agency about 20 years ago. So essentially, I see my role, I'm first and foremost, I'm really an editor. I'm really an idea developer. So I work with journalists, I work with a lot of history professors, work with business leaders on really kind of refining ideas. And I'm sure we'll get into that, as this hour progresses. So my main focus now really is kind of topical nonfiction, a limited amount of fiction, and actually some graphic novels.
Great. And Jennifer Chen Tran, if I look up Manuscript Wishlist, it says that you not only do fiction and nonfiction, looks like you've done a bunch of cool cookbooks and you do kids books, YA and MG. So tell us a little bit about what you might be open for.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm Zooming from a random conference room in the middle of Long Island because I didn't want to do it from my parents' house. And I'm here in New York for the week, so thanks for bearing with me. I've been an agent for 13 years now. I represent a variety of different areas, as you mentioned. I recently did a preempt for a cookbook by The Blind Chef here in Houston, which is actually my home base. And it's a narratively driven cookbook, beautiful story. I pretty much just am a Gemini and I like probably do too many different areas. But I really love the challenge and I've sold a couple graphic novels on the children's side as well. I would love to see more graphic novels for adults. I think that's a growth area that is very interesting to me as a former art major. And just really looking for singularity of voice more than anything across the genres.
Fantastic. Now, Prannoy, when you used to Zoom into my classes, you were at Little Brown as an editor and at St. Martin's as an editor, and you've recently switched to being an agent. And when I look up George Burchard Agency, it lists all the different topics that you're interested in, and it seems like it's mostly nonfiction. Is that correct at this point?
Yes. Many, many years ago, I was doing fiction at FSG and Picador, but since then, predominantly nonfiction. I was a nonfiction editor, narrative nonfiction, history, science, journalism, runs the gamut, big ideas, etc. And then as an agent, it's really expert-driven nonfiction with interest in humor, quirky stories, really kind of committed to, new ideas and finding kind of new ways into either familiar topics or entirely new ways into new realms of thought, as well as revising things that we know, whether it's in health, whether it's in culture, whether it's in science, and so forth.
Good, and I always think right when an agent's, right when somebody's starting is a good time to bug them because they need clients. So, and Ryan, who was my agent and sold 5 books, including 2 impossible sales that nobody else could sell, and one was a New York Times bestseller. And I think you've sold 14 books from students. So tell us what you're working on. You seem to have half fiction, half nonfiction, would you say?
That's right. I do about half fiction and half nonfiction. On the fiction side, I like general audience books for adults, book club fiction, commercial fiction, crime fiction. And on the nonfiction side, I do a lot of current events, narrative, history, idea-driven books. I work with a lot of journalists and academics.
And I didn't see you on Manuscript Wishlist, but you seem to have your own website. So if somebody wanted to work with you, if they went on your website, would they get enough information?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so now let's talk to the book editors. So LaShonda, you're at Tiny Reparation, and it seems like you've done more fiction. Is that true? More fiction than nonfiction?
Yeah, I'm primarily a fiction editor at Tiny Operations Books, which is also a part of Dutton Plume. So nice to have that connection, Michael. You were there a lot longer than I was. I've been there for 2 years. I moved over from Simon and Schuster. But yeah, building the fiction list at Tiny Operations Books and really excited to be doing a range of titles, mostly in the commercial upmarket and book club space.
And usually when I talk to my students about how one sells a book, it seems like there's a lot of nonfiction that could be sold based on a proposal, but is it true that with fiction, especially a debut, you pretty much always need the whole manuscript?
100% of the time, yes. Especially a debut, need the whole manuscript to really get the feel of the book, you know. Novels are all about whether they follow through, if they finish strong.
And usually people at big publishers like to work with agents, editors at big publishers. Would you say that if somebody wants to work with you, they'd be better off getting a literary agent first?
Yes, there's been this rare slim chance of maybe having something come into my inbox unsolicited and me liking it and maybe trying to connect the author with an agent down the line, but 99.9% of the time, most of the work I evaluate is agented.
Oh, and Joy, so you specialize in children's books, and I think you've done both YA, young adult, middle grade, and picture books. Is that right?
That's right. I also do doing a lot of graphic novels these days and some narrative nonfiction as well.
And you've actually written some pieces for Writer's Digest, some great pieces that kind of give an overview about what exactly is entailed with picture books, YA and MG. Would you say that it's also true with kids' books that you, if it's fiction, that you're pretty much going to need the whole manuscript, whereas if it's nonfiction, you might be able to sell it on a proposal?
Yeah, I think that's right. With fiction, it's really good to see, how does the narrative arc shape, how does the author kind of stick the landing? How do the threads of the story come together? With nonfiction, depending on what the topic is and also what the author's background is, by which I mean, when I do narrative nonfiction, I usually work with pretty seasoned journalists, who've written for the New York Times, LA Times, etc. If you have that kind of credibility and you can pitch an idea with some sample pages and also clips to what you've done, that is, that's certainly a way that we can work. But I think if somebody is going to sell something, at least in my experience in the narrative nonfiction, middle grade or YA, it would be really important to me that they have a journalistic background.
Interesting, cool. And Nicholas, so at Simon and Schuster, I think you said that you're also doing mostly nonfiction. Is that accurate?
Yes, I do nonfiction mostly exclusively now. So I always say I'm a journalist at heart. That's my background. I'm very into smart pop culture and sports as well, however. But the list overall works out to narrative nonfiction, histories, memoir, biographies, some science, and a lot of investigative journalism as well.
And would you say that you're buying most of the nonfiction based on proposal?
Absolutely. I mean, most likely I would say probably 85 to 90% is coming in that way. Sometimes we do reach out to clients, authors directly. I've been an agent in the past in my head, but authors directly. But once in a while, for the most part, it's going to be agented work that comes in wrong submission in the
And
typical fashion.
And there's been, I mean, it's very, very difficult to sell memoirs these days. We're going to talk about that. But so do you think that, does it ever help to have a completed memoir from your standpoint? Or are you buying memoirs based on proposal also?
We don't demand a memoir be completed, no. I mean, obviously, if it's completed, that can go both ways, honestly, I would say. Have a full memoir come in. But I'd certainly review the material if I was delivered it that way.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to ask one of my favorite questions, which is what should we never do? Like, what would make you feel, oh my God, I'm never going to deal with this person? And of course, I have a lot of editors and agents say that if you submit the work on Tuesday and I get a phone call on Wednesday saying, did you read it yet? You're like on my blacklist, go away. I know you're crazy. So could you be idiosyncratic for us? So Matthew, for example, do you get a lot of people that send you poetry, even though you make it really clear on manuscript wish list that you don't do poetry? Like what are the mistakes that you're seeing that make you say no right away to authors?
Oh God, not being able to express themselves in a basic query letter, not being clear. It's remarkable how people don't self-edit, sloppiness, things like that.
And I've also been told that a lot of people send very, very long letters, like 500-word letter is probably too long for the first communication to an agent, right?
Oh yeah, forget it.
Good. Good. I tell my students, I'm always cutting extra words. In fact, you know what makes me crazy? They always end their letters by saying, thank you so much for your time and consideration. I really appreciate it. And here's my number and here's my email in case you need to get a hold of me. And I'm really up for editing and anything you want. And I'm just like, just say thanks. And I'm just like cutting it all. So yeah, so short and sweet. I like that. Okay, Jennifer, what makes you feel like I can't work with this person or this just isn't going to happen?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think it's really about managing expectations. And so, a lot of times people will comp to books that have sold really well or say, I'm the next J.K. Rowling. It's not necessarily a red flag, but it does give me pause because I think a lot of people go into the query trenches with the expectation they're going to become the next bestseller, which is a great thing to aspire to, but not necessarily, comping to those titles in your query letter. Another thing is just like querying in the areas that I don't represent. I still get science fiction queries to this day, even though I say very clearly I don't represent science fiction. So following instructions is a big thing and just making sure you're following the submission guidelines.
Right, and comparable titles are so important. I write about that in Book Bible. And for comparable titles, a lot of people will say, it's a cross between Great Gatsby and Eat, Pray, Love, or, they're really overblown. So would you say being a little more realistic or maybe picking a debut author who's similar to you is a better bet?
I think it varies depending on the genre, but generally I would tell people like for positioning, you want to make sure you really get it right. And I can't tell you, I mean, it's a bit dated now, but every time I got a memoir comparing it to Eat, Pray, Love, that still happens. So you just want to be really cognizant of what has kind of jumped the shark and already, become too much used as a comp. That makes sense.
Good. And Pranoy, I know you just recently started being an agent, but what's a big turnoff for you that would make you think I'm not going to work with this person?
Sure. I actually just put in a comment to build off of Matthew's point. One thing that I mean, there's probably several things, and some of this relates to being an editor as well. But what I would say, one of the big things that I've come to realize, it sort of tees off a little bit off. Sorry, I'm just got to make sure I get the name correct. All right, I am going to. There's a lot of panelists, so is that I see a lot of authors attempt. It's not even just comparing themselves to big authors. I understand that often people think they have to do that, and that's part of it. But I see a lot of people comparing themselves to quite literally better than God. Like that this without this book nothing matters but this book. It's going to sell more than the Bible. Oh, George Orwell was nice, but I'm better. This just complete sense of not letting the work speak for itself. I always find that authors, especially authors who have yet to publish a book or in the early stages, who believe that somehow they want to present themselves more than the material. Let the material speak for itself. If it becomes something like that, wonderful. But I always find it kind of off-putting when people sort of presume that everybody needs to have it and we haven't even established hello.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And in general, I always say understate, don't overstate. So that's a really good thing to keep in mind. Now, Ryan, what kind of reasons are you, what happens where you just don't want to work with somebody?
I'm just going to be repeating my great colleagues' fabulous answers, honestly. I mean, grandiosity is a big turnoff for me. And usually that looks like somebody comparing their book to a classic, like a real classic. And that's not a thing.
Now, what about impatient? Because, a lot of my students are like, I sent it Friday and I haven't heard yet, and it's a whole week. And I'm like, oh my God, an agent can take 6 months or 8 months to get back to you. So what's an appropriate amount of time to follow up? Like a month?
I think a month is an appropriate time to follow up to a query letter. I think for a proposal, maybe 8 weeks. I think for a manuscript, 8 to 12 weeks. But there's always the caveat that if you get an offer for representation from someone else, I think most agents want to hear about that. And I think the appropriate way to tell them is, hey, I'm really excited about you. I really want to hear what you think. I wanted to let you know I did get an offer from another agent. Could you please let me know, within a week if you want to do this or not?
Great. I always say to my students that are impatient to follow up, I'm like, okay, go get a short clip in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York, or New Yorker, and then follow up, because then it'll get their attention.
That's the best way to follow up.
Yeah, and it'll give them, ammunition to sell the book more. So I always think that, yeah, you have to be strategic in following up quickly. Okay, let's hear from the book editors now. I know that you guys are getting most of your books from literary agents, but LaShonda, is there anything that you're seeing that mistakes that could be corrected? I know a lot of editors say that they'll, especially with fiction, that they'll get a book that starts out gangbusters and then it just peters out and it's not as exciting towards the end. Is there anything like that you see?
Yeah, I think my number one thing that I'm seeing a lot of is slow starts. Just starting a manuscript starting off in a way that's just not engaging. And maybe the writer is thinking like I'm building up momentum to like a reveal or until like things start getting put in place. But those first 50 pages are so important for the evaluation process. So yeah, lots of slow starts and saving all the good stuff towards the end. It's just not doing anyone any favors.
I love that because I'm so impatient that I'm always saying, if you don't grab me by the first line, I'm already lost. I think, was it Duck Leonard who said like no scenery. I don't want scenery. I don't want weather. Like just jump into the scene. So that's great advice. Joy, I know that you actually wrote a piece in Writer's Digest about mistakes that people make in kids' books. So could you give us a few? I know the funny one that I love was that, somebody pitching you and saying, well, my kids love this story, or something like that. What else comes to mind?
Yeah, Sue and I definitely share some of these, I would say frustrations, or maybe more tips that folks could keep in mind. One I know Sue and I agree on is that it makes perfect sense for an adult who wants to write for children to have been inspired by books that maybe they loved as a child or they loved reading to their children. However, the market has changed from the time when, my mom was reading to me, for example, Velveteen Rabbit. We loved it and she read it to me, night after night. However, that's not a format that's very popular these days. And I would say it comes up a lot, not so much in my submissions at work, but in my work as a freelance developmental editor for people with children's stories. A lot of people have written like a 10,000 word book with light illustrations throughout. And that's just not a robust category. So one of the things that Sue and I think the advice that we all both give is if you want to write for children now, it really serves you well to educate yourself about what's working in the market now. You can certainly be inspired by the past, but you need to familiarize yourself with the categories. And you need to kind of have the modesty to know that it's very unlikely that you're going to be a category buster. I had a freelance client come back to me after I had shared some information about the challenge of an 8,000 word illustrated book. What this famous author did it and this famous author did it. Famous authors who are best-selling have a little more latitude than a new author does. So read books that are doing well now within the category that you want to write for. It's really about that pre-education. Writing for kids looks really easy. It's really, really hard.
And actually, if you don't mind me asking, I think a lot of people that take my book class and that have kids' books, they do their own illustrations. They kind of, oh, I'm really good at doodling. Or they find a friend who has also not been published to do the illustrations, when I've been told that most kids' books, the editor wants to be in charge of who's going to illustrate. Is that usually?
Yes, that's correct. Unless your best friend is a New York Times best-selling or Caldecott winning illustrator, don't do that. And actually, even if your best friend is that, the publisher often wants to makes the connection between your manuscript and the illustrator themselves. To that point, also, when it comes to illustration notes, I would say to people, only put in what's essential. You know, if it's essential that something happens visually that's not in the text, put it in. But beyond that, it's not your job to art direct it or to say how you envision the characters looking. Only information that's essential that the illustrator wouldn't know, but it's very meaningful to you.
And when it comes to graphic novels, I know people that are doing graphic novels that are doing the drawing and the writing also. So in that case, do they need to have the whole manuscript, or could it be a partial manuscript, do you think, if they're putting both the drawings and the writing?
With the graphic novels that I'm doing, and I have signed up sort of shockingly like 12 in the last year. I don't know. I just went on binge. They were all bought kind of on spec. You know, some of them were ideas that we grew in-house. Some of them were, one was an author illustrator, you know, the same person doing the same thing, and that we bought on a sample. Again, that's an illustrator whose work is in the New York Times. She's a New Yorker illustrator. It's like it kind of matters, like, you know, not to make it impossible to get in the door, but like, you know, a graphic novel is a huge undertaking. So you need to be sure that the person can actually do the work. And it's great if they have some other work to back it up or examples of their, you know, career, because it can be really hard to get into bed with a graphic novel and be able to see it through.
And Nick, what kind of mistakes are you seeing? We were talking about comp titles in the proposal. Are there other mistakes that you're seeing in proposals, even though you're going mostly through agents?
Yeah, a thing that's come up recently, actually. I've had quite a few, at least 3 or 4 in the last, you know, maybe 2 months, proposals where it felt like when I read it that there was maybe something added to it, maybe later in the process. You know, I feel like someone is wanting to have kind of these multi-part proposals go out, and, you know, I'd rather just have the best material come to me and we'll work on it with you. And even in the kind of interview process, rather than tack things on that are a little less developed or I don't feel that's kind of, you know, story central in a proposal stage. So
yeah, and so
right back to what you said earlier with other editors, kind of like be pithy, be straightforward, be early, don't bury the lead. Best stuff, go forward, and we'll work on the rest as an editor. That's just my kind of take on it, I guess.
yes, but my writing guide, I detail, I think, the 6 or 7 elements that you need in a book proposal. And I've heard a lot of editors and agents say that the one that people flub a lot is the overview, because a lot of times the overview is the start of the proposal, and that some people do sort of a perfunctory recap instead of realizing that the overview should read like you just open a book, like it should be as exciting or in the right voice. Do you find that sometimes that the overview isn't quite up to the sample pages?
Absolutely. Same thing. You know, I think same point, you know, if it feels extraneous, if it feels like it's kind of throat clearing, we don't need that. And I would also say, as an editor in-house, there are so many people reading these proposals when I do want to acquire it that I'm asking them to do the same kind of stuff editing process of like getting past that perhaps perfunctory or perhaps, you know, a little slow open. So it helps every separate way to have that kind of be very tight and very edited down, honestly.
Cool. All right. So my next question is, just to preface it, I think it's a really tough market right now, especially for memoirs. But my agent said she's been having trouble with debuting middle grade. And I heard that adult fiction is down. I don't know whether it's crazy politics or the tariffs or censorship. Something's going on in the zeitgeist, I think, that's making it very, very difficult. And I know that there's a lot of things that I have done to break through myself. And I used to always have shrink appointments where I would be freaking out about, you know, this rejection or that rejection. And then I would always know a couple people that broke in with fiction or nonfiction. And my shrink would always say, what are they doing that you're not doing? And it took me like a long time to figure it out. Some of the things that I wound up coming to are, number one, often I would finish a whole manuscript instead of just doing a proposal, because just because I get a no on a proposal doesn't mean, like, if I could write the whole manuscript, whether it's a novel, kids book, self-help, memoir, when I've written the whole thing, it just, for some reason, it's opened up the project. We talked about clips, getting a big clip in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New Yorker, New York Magazine. I've definitely sold books that way. I've hired ghost editors who are literary agents or book editors to kick the material into shape before I even get them to agenting. And I know some of you do ghost editing. I've gotten on TV, radio, big podcasts. I've had foreword and introductions by famous people. My last one was Congressman Raskin agreed to do it. And I've gotten big advanced blurbs. So those are some of the things that, that I think could help somebody break through if they have a good project, but they're not necessarily famous or they don't have a great social media following. So I want to find out from you guys, do you agree with any of those? Is there anything else you could think of? So Matthew, if you're having trouble selling a book and then your author can do a Modern Love or can do a New York Magazine, The Cut, does that make it easier for you to, go to editors and sell it? Do you agree that that could sometimes make the difference?
Yeah, of course it does. All of those things are really helpful. I don't know. It's, as I said earlier, I'm mostly doing pretty serious nonfiction these days and working with a lot of history professors and business people. And it's just a question of continuing to really refine and home in on what the unique idea is. Because once you get that, editors become interested.
That's really smart to say, because I remember, just for an example,
Are you ready?
I was,
Ready, spaghetti?
wait, guys, I'm going
Take your
to
time.
mute. Somebody's talking. I'm muting. Sorry. Unmute if you guys, the panelists, unmute. So when I was working on my addiction book, Lighting Up, I remember, somebody smart said to me, go check what's out there already. Because even though I knew that addiction books were big, and what I found was there were tons of addiction books out there, memoirs about people quitting smoking, quitting heroin, quitting cocaine, pills. And there were no books at the time. There wasn't one memoir out about somebody quitting cigarettes or quitting pot. So I had a lot of addictions that I quit, but so I actually rearranged it to call it Lighting Up: How I Stopped Smoking, Drinking, and Everything Else I Loved in Life Except Sex. So I positioned it because it seemed like there was a gap in the field, and I was able to sell it to Random House fairly quickly. So would you say that's a good thing? If somebody has a nonfiction idea, should they immediately go and see, has a biography of this person been written?
Oh, absolutely. You have to, of course, you always have to focus on your comps, but you also have to be perhaps a little versatile. I had a client once come to me she was only 30 years old and she wrote a whole memoir on living with chronic illness. And one, I thought she was too young to be writing a memoir, but two, it just didn't feel like a great book. And so we talked it through, and she ended up writing a really smart self-help book on living with chronic illness with lots of personal anecdotes. So you have to be able to shift and think that way, a little more outside the box. You can't always be stuck with your own story, but you have to, or another example, if you are going into self-help or health, moving away from memoir, then you have to bring in the stories of other people and make it a bigger book.
By the way, I'm so glad you said that, because I had a book called Unhooked, which I envisioned as a memoir that I was co-authoring with my addiction specialist, and nobody would buy it. And Ryan said, since he has such a great platform, why don't you bring in case studies and make it a self-help book? And Ryan sold it as a self-help book, and it turned into a New York Times bestseller.
Smart guy, that Ryan.
Yes, no, but I even have a chapter in Book Bible called Genre Fluidity, because quite a few people, this is a common thing that I've seen happen. Someone's trying to write an adult memoir, but the most exciting, crazy things that happened were happening when they were 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And in a few cases, those made better YA or MG books. So, and also, sometimes if a memoir isn't dramatic enough, you can make it into a novel, a comic novel. So, or, so that's a really good point. So be flexible, especially if you get feedback from agents or ghost editors or people you trust. That's really good advice. Jennifer, what else are you seeing if somebody's not having luck?
Yeah, I think, it really depends on what you're writing, but for nonfiction, so much depends on the concept, the platform. There's all these elements that have to come together. I always tell writers like they get so upset about the platform thing, but publishers are risk averse and they want to make sure that you're bringing an engaged audience to the table, right? 80% of books don't earn out their advances. So it's a very competitive marketplace. And so a lot of this is preparation and just making sure you're putting your best foot forward. For nonfiction, especially in the prescriptive areas, the concept is so important. Again, and just really finding the right champion who understands your work and has an editorial vision. I think it's so important to find that right agent who's going to be in your corner for the long haul.
Now, I actually know people who got a ton of followers on newsletters and on Substack, and that seemed to help them get book deals. So is that something that you've encouraged authors to try?
Absolutely. I talked to a Big Five editor not too long ago, and she told me that, the platform, a lot of times people obsess about it and they think it's just one aspect of social media but it's really, you have to look at it holistically. And in this particular case, the author had something like 30,000 paid Substack subscribers, and that was enough of a platform for them to indicate there was an engaged audience. So it's really by a case basis. I've sold books for, I recently sold a book by the former mental skills coach for the Chicago Cubs, and he has like sub 2,000 on Instagram. And I was very blunt with him. I'm like, your social media is not your strong suit, but let's work on your speaking engagements. Let's really play up the fact that you're on the road speaking. And that was enough to get a 2-book deal with a publisher. So
Now,
a lot of it's strategy. Yeah.
I have a student that this surprised me. She was a corporate coach, and she said at a panel that she went to all of her corporate clients and she said, would you commit in advance to buying certain amount of books? And I think they committed to like 10,000, and she got a much bigger advance from Penguin that way. So I never thought of that. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, special sales, like anytime you can indicate there's a commitment to buy, that's always persuasive.
Yeah, interesting. Pranoy, is there any advice that we talked about that would help? Like, would it help you if somebody comes in with either a lot of social media followers or newsletter or clips, like a new good clip?
Well, I want to provide, I think we've been talking, people have been sort of speaking to this, and we can get into this in more detail if others have more specific questions. I'm seeing a lot of questions here. One thing that I want to sort of mention that I think everybody can do that sticks with the writing is, and I'm seeing it a lot. I saw it a lot as an editor. I'm seeing it a lot as an agent. When people mention, for example, that they see their book as and I had this, I'm going through this right now with someone. I represent an economist. He's got a huge platform, blah, blah, blah. So, but here's the challenge. He keeps saying he wants it to be like Freakonomics. Well, I don't think he fully understands what made Freakonomics so appealing, which was the storytelling, the unconventional, counterintuitive takeaways that had very little econ and very much like Gladwell and others, writing in a sort of very accessible, story-driven way. He's not a storyteller. He wants to talk about econ. I think it's somewhat of an issue when authors think of comps in a kind of narrow, one-dimensional way. I remember talking with an editor at Random House just a month ago who said someone compared their book on submission to an author, successful author, but that author is very well known for delivering a pristine manuscript requiring very little editing, extremely clever. They don't exist. Like, there's very famous authors, very few of them are like this. But to say that you're like that and then to proceed in the proposal to say you're open to suggestions means you're not at all like that author, because that's the author who just shows up and has it all figured out. I think it's really important to recognize if the book is like Glass Castle, like Eat, Pray, Love, whatever it may be, why are those books appealing? What is it about it? Is it the voice? Is it the story? Is it something so remarkable that it's simply unbelievable? And then looking at where your work aligns with that, where it differs, and perhaps, and this is where I think you can even transcend and look into other areas where your skill set can be elevated and work in your benefit. If you're not a very good writer on the page, then maybe a more prescriptive space where you do have good advice, that actually is more suitable than writing a literary memoir. I think people should read the books that they're comparing themselves to or looking to as models and also try to understand what makes them appealing and then decide, like, is this, is this right for what I'm trying to do? Is this the reader? And often the reader is not who you think. And the readers of those books are often surprised by, what it was. And I think that understanding what, rather than just looking at, oh, this book was successful, there are various reasons why books are successful. Some of the authors are famous, some of them are less so. Sometimes it's on the page. There's all sorts of reasons depending on the category as well. And I think it's a matter of really understanding what it is about those books that you're trying to compare yourself to. And if there are strengths there that you can amplify yourself, go for it. But if it reveals to you that there's actually things here that are outside the bandwidth of your story, outside the bandwidth of your subject, look to other things. And I think that is an education that we can all do and also helps people really get a sense of where your strength lies as the project entails. And then all the other aspects about how to build a platform around that or how to amplify it can fall in tow.
Cool. Now, Ryan, I remember you taught at the New School and at Media Bistro and other places. Do you think it helps to take classes or seminars with editors or agents to learn how to put a proposal together? And I know also you've done some ghost editing on the side. So could you is that advice that you might give someone? Especially, I see a lot of students who they just say, just finish my, my memoir, just finish my novel, just finish my proposal. And how long are you working on it? Like 4 months. And has anyone read it? No, give me the names of all your agents. And I'm like, whoa, 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 slow down, slow down, slow down. So at that point, sometimes I suggest a class or a ghost editor sometimes if someone could afford it. Do you think that can help?
Well, I want to circle back to your first question, which is what are people doing wrong? And I had an answer. Everyone was so great who answered before me. But another answer is that I often see writers sending things out that are half-baked. They're not finished. They finish a draft and they get really excited and they want things to happen right away. And the truth is that the real work, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, is not in a draft, it's in revision and revision and revision and revision. So the more eyes a writer can get on their work, I think the stronger the work has the potential of getting. And whether that's as a freelance editor or a class, there are all kinds of great places you can take classes at in New York or LA or online to do a book proposal or a manuscript or a partial manuscript or a picture book. I think that's a huge help. I think writing groups are a huge help. I think writing residencies can be a huge help. I mean, the more you can revise your work, the better it can get.
Yeah,
and you really only get one shot with, with each agent, with each publisher. I mean, sometimes we'll agree to look at things again as agents, but publishers almost never do.
Yeah, so don't finish something at 4 a.m, decide it's brilliant and submit it. Like you need like a strategy for criticism and revision, I think, is my experience. LaShonda, here's a question that comes up a lot in my classes with fiction. How much do authors have to understand what subgenre of fiction their book falls under? So should they know, is this literary? Is it upmarket? Is it, if there's fantasy elements, do they call it speculative? Like how much does an author have to know? And by the time you're getting a manuscript, do you think it's already like the agent has already helped the author, or do you guys sometimes help them figure out what to call it?
Yeah, usually agents do a bulk of that work. In the pitch letter will say something like, oh, a rom-com or a cozy murder mystery or something along those lines. But sometimes something is doing multiple things, and then it's up to me in-house to like sort of pitch it as one thing or the other. for sales and for a shorthand in-house. So I usually like lean on what's most selling, but my favorite kind of books are the ones that are doing multiple things anyways.
And what other mistakes are you seeing that, oh, I'm sorry, we went through mistakes, so advice. So do you agree that, whether it's a class or beta readers or a ghost editor, like, do you agree that, doing a lot of revisions and having smart criticism is a way to make the manuscript better?
Yeah, I don't think you should be sending in the first draft to an agent for query. I think if you are part of a writing group or if you are in a class or doing something like that, I think the more you spend time to think about characters and plot and how the narrative arc develops, the better the finished product will be. So yeah, definitely agree with having more eyes on a novel, especially.
Good. And Joy, I know that you've done some ghost editing on the side. Do you think that, that helps? And are there any other advice, especially with kids projects, that you could think of that would help people?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I'm a big fan of like order of operations. I'm very organized and very orderly. And I think sometimes people might go about writing for children a little bit out of order. I think the first question you have to ask yourself if you want to write for children is, do I know how to write for children? And if the answer is no, you need to take some classes, my friends. Specific classes in writing for children, because it's a specific thing. And you can do that in lots of different ways. The advice I generally give people is consider joining SCBWI, Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. I am in no way affiliated with SCBWI. I just recommend it because it's reputable. Important note, not all places that teach you that advertise they're going to teach you how to write a book for children are reputable. I've stumbled into them myself sometimes as a speaker or educator. It's very uncomfortable to see creative people being taken advantage of, being promised something. And you all are smart enough to be in Sue's class, so you know it matters to be with an organization that's the real deal. So I recommend joining something like SCBWI. The Highlights organization also offers great classes for children. There's other, resources out there, but really take specific classes in writing specifically for children, because there's a way to do it, to educate yourself. Then, once you've done that a lot and really honed your craft and learned how to do it, then there's lots of different things you can do. Working with a developmental editor like I do on the side is great. It just kind of breaks my heart that sometimes people come to me and I'm happy to work with them and tell them what I know, but they would have been better off taking classes first. First, you want to take the classes, then you want to do the edits. The other note I'll give people is that I recently had a developmental edit client who had 2 other developmental edits that she had paid a lot for. The manuscript came in and I thought it still needed a lot of work. And it turned out in our conversation that the developmental editor she had did not have a children's expertise. That's not useful. It's a special thing. It doesn't mean that you couldn't get a good edit from someone who didn't work in children's. You might be able to, I certainly don't know everything. I've just worked in children's books for 30 years. So there were certain missteps that I saw that this author had done that were really going to mean she was, in my opinion, she was going to be well suited to take the book apart and put it back together, because it was violating some conventional norms of YA. So really just, I guess my headline is buyer beware. Really be sure what you're getting into before you start doing your work.
I'm really glad you said that, because I personally only recommend ghost editors who are or were literary agents or book editors. And I had a bad experience early on, which was I knew some brilliant people, poets and literary people from my writing group, who kept pushing me in a direction for my first memoir, 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, that really pushing me towards dark and poetic, and it just wasn't working. And then finally, luckily, somebody recommended a ghost editor who did women's commercial books for Doubleday, who'd been doing it for 20 years. And I hired her, and boy, did she kick it into shape, and it sold to Random House in a very short time. And I realized, even though these people were really smart, they were not the right people to be giving me criticism for the kind of book that I was doing. And right after that, I became very convinced that not only do you only want to go to a literary agent or an editor, you want to go to somebody who has an expertise in your arena. So that's why, I'm constantly sending Joy people that do kids books, any kind of kids project, especially if they haven't taken classes. I know Pranoy is an expert at history and nonfiction, and I'm constantly recommending Ryan, especially with novels, because I know he helped me with my debut novel and with book proposals. So if anybody wants to email me, I have a list of editors and agents who do ghost editing on the side who could, you know, I could give you their email addresses, but I feel like that's my secret weapon, you know, is getting a manuscript kicked into shape before I'm giving it to my agent to sell. And I only go to people that are experts.
Sue, can I just add one thing about advice?
Sure.
It's specifically for nonfiction. I work with a lot of experts, so some of this might not apply, but I think for the group it's interesting. And I've said this, I believe, on panels in the past. So like, again, this is for nonfiction. You're writing a novel, it might not be totally applicable, but I've always said, and I've said this for years, I think the book is always the last thing. When you have ideas, when you're putting it down and you start writing a book, you start putting down a proposal, we all get very excited by our ideas, but sometimes and often, and I see this in queries I get, that's an article. And sometimes you can put it out and everything you need to put in, you can do it in 5,000 words. You can do it in 6,000 words and get it off your chest, get it out of you. And then through that process, it allows you to practice with craft. It allows you to work with a smaller material. It allows you to work with a direct editor if you sell it with to a publication. But it also enables you to sort of not limit yourself to thinking you have one idea, you have two ideas, and also allows you to see what are the things that are not 5,000 words, not 6,000 words, actually do deserve a deeper treatment. And maybe it's going to be an angle of that. But I always say, when you start out, when you're starting to think about it, it's not your first thing. Write that piece as a piece, not as a book. Always think of the book as a sort of last step. And I think it also adds a gravitas to the work because it means it demands to be a book. And that also, for many reasons, can be very appealing.
Yeah, and I'll add advice, Prannoy, to that, which is that when I do my sell your book class, I almost always in almost every genre, I'll say to somebody, can you sell a short piece on this topic? And if you can't, there's a problem because it's so much easier to sell 3 pages than 300 pages. So I find that to be a really good test. And quite often, when it winds up in Modern Love or the New Yorker or Wall Street Journal or Washington Post, that becomes part of the proposal. So I would go the other side also, which is try it because it'll make it so much easier. Nick, tell us, do you have advice for somebody that would love to work with you at Simon & Schuster? And so they're working on a proposal. So what advice do you have that could make it better?
I think really, a thing I often see missing or underdeveloped in proposals, really think about who your people are. Like, what groups do you take part in? What people have you crossed paths with that you think can help you? One, we talk a lot about the craft work of the proposals and the books. Obviously, it's ultimately help. But I'm really looking for like, what subculture can this person tap into to help us promote this book? It's more and more important. I think Substack kind of shows part of what that looks like in a modern day, because it was really directed toward kind of these subgroups of people that really are attached to a person or an idea. But as an editor acquiring books, I have to be really clear with my people about what are the target audiences and how can it be activated pretty directly and clearly. And I'm seeing some proposals are doing that right now, but it's not happening in all of them yet. And I think it has to happen for all of them ultimately. And that's kind of my advice to a person trying to get into the business now.
And have you ever worked with someone that either has a co-author or works with a ghostwriter? Because I know, for example, there's people that come to me that have really fascinating stories and they're not writers. And sometimes by combining with a known writer, that's a way of, I did that with American Shield, Sergeant Gannell. And is that something that that an agent and editor could help with, or do you think it's a smart thing if if a writer has a story but they've never published before, think of a collaborator maybe that could help?
I've had quite a few ghostwritten books that I've done. It's varied quite a bit. Honestly, I'd like to see the effort at least made at the proposal stage. So I've had a professional ghostwriter brought in at that point in the game. If the person's not got the chops themselves to write the material, I want to see if they thought about that and realized that early in the game. That said, ultimately, I am often finding, or half the time finding, that I might want to work with the author and the agent to kind of figure out if it might makes sense to bring a new person at that stage during the actual book process. So,
Can I add a comment?
Sure.
So freelance editors are great. Absolutely. Very many, there are many of them. They're very talented. I've done some freelance editing. I love, like I said from the beginning, I love editing. But bottom line, the project, I'm talking about topical nonfiction, has to be very clear at the thesis level. And that's why with authors I take on as clients, I do this all the time. I tell them, write me 3 paragraphs. You should be able to get the gist of your book, nail it down in 3 paragraphs, treat it like hardcover flap copy. 2 paragraphs on what the book is about, why it's different from other books, and 1 paragraph on why you and you alone are the perfect person to write this book.
Cool.
So it's, you got to do, I always do that type of work with my clients first. And, you know, then I typically do the editorial development work of the book proposal and all of that. But that's the type of stuff where the agent and the author have to really get aligned. And when you do that, it's kind of liberating for the author. And then they usually want to write everything themselves, and things fall into place pretty well.
Cool. All right. So for a last question, what do you have going on right now? So we'll go the other way. So let's go to Nick. Is there a new book that you have out that we should go buy? Is there any events? Is there any classes? Anything else that you want to mention to us? So has anything come out recently, Nick?
Yes, I have a book that came out this month called The Beast in the Clouds by Natalia Holt. I believe we have a review coming in the New York Times this Sunday for it, so look out for that. But it's a great book about kind of the early era of conservation in America. It's got a Roosevelt family narrative. His 2 sons go to the Himalayan mountains, try to find a panda for the first time. But any Westerner in the world ever saw a panda. It's his 2 sons. It's kind of crazy. And I think, you know, for the fall, I have a book that I'm excited. I should have told you about this too, actually. I have a book about Barbie coming out in the fall.
Oh,
It's kind of a Mattel book, honestly,
Oh,
but it's a
cool.
Barbie book. I should send you the galley, but I will. But yeah, so that's Sharply Hit,
Exciting.
a Drift editor. I'm very excited about that. And that's in November. Those are my.
Exciting. I had an editor who said that the best way to get ahead in this business is be a good literary citizen. So do you agree that if somebody wants to be an author, like going to book events or writing reviews on Amazon and Goodreads for authors you like, do you think that's a good thing to get in the habit of? Wait, you muted yourself.
Sorry, 100%. I think one, you want to, if you can find readers of material early on, that will do that for you, or will help you develop ideas kind of in a conversational. It's great to have that kind of person in your pocket in a way. But also, I think at the end stages, when you're trying to find blurbers, when you're trying to get endorsements for events you want to host, you want to find people do events with you as an author at bookstores talking about your book. Those things all come in handy, obviously, and it's going to be really important to get that. And you also have connections to editors who want to do publish shorter pieces in advanced book as well. So it all adds up and makes sense. Yeah.
Cool. And Joy, aside from doing ghost editing on the side, I know that my former student Christina Wyman has she's on her 3rd book with you, and 2 were bestsellers. So it was Jawbreaker and Slouch. So that's exciting.
Yep, we have Breakout coming out, and I'm just reading the manuscript for the 4th one now. There's one I just want to drop in the chat. It's a funny picture book. The advice I want to give you picture book people is that what I think editors are buying now, or at least the conversation I'm hearing, is humor. And it's a broad story that can go out widely across the market. That's, if there's any advice I can give you, it's humor, it's broad, make it smart, make it best in class humor. But I think that there was an era of picture books of like these very well-meaning books, which are great still, but like, let's laugh a little bit. There's a lot to be sad about in society. So I have this book called My Cat is a Secret Agent coming out in the fall, and it's very funny. And I hope you guys like it. I'm just going to put it in the chat.
And by the way, everybody on the panel, please put in the chat if you have any, if you want to be followed by social media, if you have any events, if you want to mention your authors, please put them in the chat. LaShonda, what do you have coming out that we should buy?
I have a novel coming out August 5th. It's called This Kind of Trouble by Tochi Easy. It's set in Nigeria. It's a 100-year family saga. There is a woman who is wildly successful but has been struggling with mental health for her whole life. And her village people have told her time and time again that she's cursed. And she's a modern woman. She is taking her pills, but is in a bad place when you meet her in the novel and decides to give this curse breaking a try. And the catch is that she has to reunite with her ex-husband, who she's been estranged from for 40 years for it all to work. So it's a journey of like finding the husband, the ex-husband, and if this ritual will actually cure her.
Cool. And Matthew, what do you have coming out that we should go buy?
The only thing I'll mention is one of my clients is, since we were talking about graphic novels a lot, one of my clients is Derf Backderf, who wrote My Friend Dahmer, which has kind of become a classic. But a few years ago, the hardcover of his book Kent State came out. And it's a magnificent book published by Abrams. It's about 300 pages long. It's a really remarkable piece of kind of graphic investigative journalism, and it's really become a defining book on Kent State. And the paperback just came out, so that's why it's on my mind. So I recommend that.
Fantastic. And Jennifer, what do you have out now that we should go get?
So it's more in the reference space, but I represented a literacy teacher and she has a reference book called The Thinking Reader out now. It was published in March. And I think anything that can get teachers teaching literacy and kids reading more is a great thing. Come back to me in a year or two, because that's when a lot of my projects will be coming out. And the Blind Chef's Cookbook is slated for spring of 2027. So a bit away.
Cool. And Ryan, I know that you did a great book, The Containment by Michelle Adams, who by interesting coincidence wound up at my school. And I know that was on the cover of the New York Times Book Review. So that was a huge book. Anything else that you want to mention?
That's a really special book. Thanks for mentioning it. It's all about school desegregation and segregation, a Supreme Court case in Detroit in the 70s that was really impactful. And another book that's fun that hit the USA Today bestseller list is called Awakened by Austin Osworth. And it's a novel about a coven of trans witches who fight AI. And it's really, really fun.
Wow. That sounds very of the minute.
It's an adult book.
Good. And Pranoy, do you have any books that you did as an editor that you want us to go get?
Yeah, so later this fall, and actually he's a great example because I wrote the idea on a napkin and he's Canadian and he had probably 3 people on Instagram following him and he lives on a farm. He's a biologist, published his first book. It was an international bestseller, including in the United States. His next book is coming out. It's called Humanish, and it's all about why we tend to see human-like features in inanimate objects like our cars or chia pets, and why we even have chia pets, which is a uniquely human thing. And it's all about the science and a bunch of stories about why that is. And also, for those who are familiar with James Clyburn, the congressman from South Carolina, who's the highest ranking Black congressman in the country. He's the 8th African-American congressman elected from South Carolina. The first 7 all came after the Civil War and during Reconstruction. So he's rewriting the history of South Carolina, its racial politics, and its political legacy through the 8 men, himself included, who all preceded him. And it's called The First 8, and it'll be out this fall.
Cool. And I have a lot of online seminars and classes coming up. And since I quit all my addictions, I'm now addicted to email. So you guys all have my email. You could email me any questions that you want. And I just want to add one thing, and then if anybody else wants to, which is that my first novel took 13 years from start to finish. So instead of a book launch, it got a book mitzvah. And my most recent memoir, even though I thought I was such an expert, took 10 years and then only sold to a small publisher, but then it got great reviews. So I would say books are slow, but I have found them to be the most exciting thing in the universe. My husband hates when I say like my most exciting moment was seeing my first book get published, because he thinks it should be when we got married. And I'm like, any idiot could get married. You just need another idiot, but a book, oh my God. But anyway, I would say it's worth fighting for. And even though I think it's a tough market, I have students that have sold more than 700 books in the last decade. And I would say if I had to figure out who was getting published and who wasn't, it was the ones that weren't giving up, that just kept being open to new feedback and rewriting and fighting. Sometimes they were small presses, or sometimes, independent indies or whatever, but everybody that kept going, I think, wound up being successful. So I would say, even though it is a frustrating market, there's lots of books coming out all the time. People are figuring out ways to do it, and I think it's worth it. Anybody else have anything to add? Anyone have any stories of someone that took a really long time before they broke out? No, I'm not I have one other story, which is, I think it was, who's the author who did Housekeeping, the novelist?
Marilyn Robinson.
Yes, Marilyn Robinson. So I was once at this National Book Critics Circle event, and they called her name, and she got up to get an award. I'm pretty sure it was Housekeeping. And she gets to the podium and she says 2 words. She says, 20 years. And she gets this huge standing ovation, and thousands of people there knew exactly what she meant. She had been working on that book 20 years. So I'm not saying your project is going to take 20 years, but it's a good thing to remember that books aren't like newspaper, magazine stuff is really fast, but books could be slow, but totally worth it. So
It must have been for Gilead.
Yes. Yeah. So thanks so much. So again, it was, we were honored tonight to have literary agents Matthew Carnicelli, Jennifer Chen Tran, Brian Harbage, and Pranoy Sakur, and book editors Lashonda Anakwa, Joy Peskin, and Nicholas Ciani. And thank you guys so much. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to email. And great.
Good luck.
Writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.